And this is the pattern of translating spiritual realities to the natural realm. It is through a process, and oftentimes we do that through the repetitive thoughts, beliefs, feelings that go on within us. These things help to translate spiritual realities into the natural realm. Hey there, I'm glad you're taking the time to listen to this. How to cultivate peace and well-being. Peace is a condition of the heart that functions independent of anything going on around you. How do you get your inner self to a state where you are walking in a place of centeredness and a place of calm and a place of wholeness and wellness in spite of whatever present challenge may be occurring on the external? Well, first we've got to recognize that what is in us is stronger than what's around us. That nothing external to us is greater than the ultimate source within us. The spirit within you and I is that which transcends problems and circumstances and troubles of the world. And so we've got to figure out how to develop that inner resource that we have, that inner resource that we are, so that we can have a space of calmness and well-being and centeredness, irrespective of what's going on around us. Now, this is the work of developing our spiritual identity. When you know who you are spiritually, then you're able to maintain your sense of stability no matter what's going on around you. But these are functions of the human spirit that has been seeped and saturated in the words of God, in the words of heaven, in the words of spiritual life. And this is why it's so important what we give our attention to. So if you're going to have peace and if you're going to have a sense of well-being in the midst of an external craze, you've got to first of all pay attention to whose words you're listening to. Ask yourself the question, whose words am I listening to? Well, it's interesting. In Proverbs chapter 4, verse 20 to 23, it reads, "My child, be attentive to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings." Who is this talking? Well, it's the voice of wisdom. And so this whole chapter and much of Proverbs talks about the spirit of wisdom and how the spirit of wisdom founded the earth and how the spirit of wisdom has all knowledge and was in the beginning with God and is God. And this same spirit is talking to us through the penmanship of King Solomon, it is believed. But this is a message to us to understand how to access this inner realm of peace and well-being. And it says, "My child, be attentive to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Do not let them escape from your sight. Keep them within your heart. For they are life to those who find them and healing to all their flesh. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life." This is one of my most favorite passages because it shows us that within the heart there is deposited a container, a source of life. The scripture declares in that verse 23, "From your heart flow the springs of your life." If you can imagine a spring, a stream even of water, that there is a source from where the water comes and there's a place to where the water flows. In John, we see Jesus saying that the person who believes on me, from his belly, from her belly, which is the inner resource or the subconscious or the heart, some might call it the area of the solar plexus, from your subconscious depths, from your heart will flow rivers of living water. Well, that's directly in line with what this Proverbs text is trying to show us, that we are to keep our heart with all vigilance. What does that mean? That means the things that are deposited in your heart, what you deeply feel as true about yourself, life, God, the world, your self-image, your self-concept. What you feel deeply about yourself is what is the deposit of your heart. What you feel deeply about your environment, what you feel deeply about God is the deposit of your heart. Everything that you consent to as true is the deposit of your heart. And so we are taught to keep our hearts. If you can imagine your heart as the subconscious mind, but also as a garden that you tend. And with a garden, you have to keep out the weeds and you have to keep out the parasites and you have to make sure that it's tended and covered and kept so that after the seeds that are deposited in there, they've got enough room and time and space to grow and develop so that nothing can hinder their growth or stunt their development. And so just like with a garden, we've got to tend a garden to make it produce optimal fruit. The same thing applies to the garden of our hearts. Just like seeds and fruit and produce proceed from the ground, so do the issues of our lives spring from our hearts. And so this scripture is showing us that what is occurring in our lives is in some way connected to the environment of our heart, which is why we're admonished to keep our heart with all vigilance, it says in verse 23, Proverbs 4:23. And so if we are being good keepers, good tenders to the gardens of our hearts, we're not just gonna let anybody's words or anybody's perceptions or the latest craze or the greatest fear that's out there in the world, we're not gonna just allow it to take root in our hearts. Now, we come across a lot of information in the world, from news outlets to the things people tell us. Maybe they're somebody's personal struggles. Maybe it's something bad that happened in someone's life. Maybe it's not even something so crazily bad as much as it is a negative piece of information. And a negative piece of information has ways of being a seed that just starts to drop into the ground of your heart. And so we've got to be vigilant and say, wait a minute, if this is not what I want to see produced in my life, I've got to be vigilant, tender of the garden of my heart. You see what I'm saying? So the question that I want to ask you today, can you cultivate peace and well-being in your heart? Well, there are hooks that consciousness requires. Sometimes it's a phrase or a word that you repeat over within yourself, which is why when we study the words of Scripture or the words of God, and we discern what the words of God are for us here and now, and we take that and we meditate that, that becomes a hook that we can hang on to in consciousness and thereby deposit good seeds into the garden of our hearts. For instance, this verse 22 would be a good hook, would be a good word to use. For they are life to those who find them and healing to all their flesh. So what you would do is you would take that and you would say, God's words are life to me as I find them, and they are healing to all of my flesh. And so that word deposited repeatedly into your subconscious depths begins to reprogram the heart. And you then begin to take upon yourself the realities and the results of that state by reiterating it over and over again. These truths and realities become deposited in the garden of our heart through repetition. And it's not always through audible repetition, though speaking something audibly is powerful, but it's also what is a chronic thought pattern occurring within yourself. Chronic thought patterns become beliefs. Chronic thoughts become beliefs. And beliefs are established by becoming deeply seated in the feeling nature. So when something becomes deeply seated in the feeling nature, it is an established belief. And from there, our lives issue forth into manifestation. The things that are attracted into our experience, those blessings and those curses, in some way, oftentimes are connected to the invisible word of our own hearts and minds. And that is why we are instructed to be vigilant about the garden, about tending the garden of our own hearts, because out of it flow the springs of life. So what we've got to do is we've got to center ourselves. One of the ways I do that is by focusing on the breath. This is a very common meditation practice. It's where you simply sit there and you focus on the breath. And in focusing on the flow of the breath in and out, you still yourself and you disconnect yourself from the confines and the problems of the world around you, and you begin to sense your oneness with spirit, your oneness with all that is. And in sensing your oneness with all that is, there is a divine peace that begins to wash over you. Simply focusing on the breath. And sometimes you can add the silent affirmation, I am. I am is the name of God as revealed in the Old Testament. When Moses was about to be confronting Pharaoh, Moses encounters this burning bush, the scripture says, and that bush gives him an experience where he hears the voice of God saying, I am that I am. And it's that voice that sends Moses into Pharaoh's territory to deliver the people of Israel from bondage. But that is a depiction of the name and the nature of God. I am, and that's literally what Jehovah means and what Jesus means. Embedded in it is the realization that God is the essence of all that is, and I am not separate from God, and God is within and among me. And that is the beautiful realization that Jesus came to reveal to humanity, that the fulfillment of Christ's finished work on the cross and Christ's resurrection is the bridging of humanity with divinity, so that we might wake up to the realization of who we truly are in spirit, so that we will then respond to life and impact and affect life in a way that reveals the wholeness and the well-being of spirit, of God's spirit. And realizing that you are spirit and you engage your spiritual faculties by keeping and tending the garden of your heart, by making sure that the deposit in your subconscious depths is that which is in alignment with the peace and well-being that you desire to experience without, then you begin to create a little heaven on earth. And this was Jesus's prayer. That's called the Lord's Prayer today, which says, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." It's our spiritual faculty that is the container of heaven's resources, and they begin to be translated from our spirits to our minds, our wills, and our emotions, our souls, and then into the body of our affairs. And this is the pattern of translating spiritual realities to the natural realm. It is through a process, and oftentimes we do that through the repetitive thoughts, beliefs, and feelings that go on within us. These things help to translate spiritual realities into the natural realm through the spoken word, through silent affirmations, through meditation. When you meditate, you loosen yourself from the grip of the world around you. You loosen yourself from the problems and the traumas that are even in the subjective minds of others that might be affecting you in unseen ways. You loose yourself from those things when you meditate, and you begin to bridge and align yourself with the realm of wholeness. And so I just want to encourage you today to see your oneness with spirit and begin to affirm, God in me is my release from the confines of external problems. God in me is my realization of peace and total well-being. In fact, I encourage you to repeat that. God in me is my realization of peace and total well-being. Take out some time where you are. Do a breath meditation. Focus on the I am presence of God encircling you and surrounding you. And in that function, in that mode, you begin to see that there really is no separation of you from the goodness of God. In fact, the goodness of God begins to surround you, begins to enfold you, begins to occupy your consciousness. This is tending the ground of your heart. This is tending the ground of your mind and your spirit, so that you can be a vessel through which peace and well-being is manifested. It starts within and it proceeds out. And when peace and well-being reside within you, it's not long until you begin to see the results of that occurring in the external world around you. And everything that would be contrary to that must ultimately bow to the identity of spirit residing in you. When you know who you are, peace and well-being is your natural state. And everything that occurs in your life must give way to the peace and well-being that you truly are. It's my prayer that you awaken to the greatness and the grandeur that you are in spirit, and that you allow that light to shine from spirit to your soul, your mind, your will, and your emotions, and into the body of your affairs. You can do this. You're not alone in this journey. And these are spiritual tools that equip us to get the best out of life and to give the best in life. If you're blessed by this, I encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, jasonpowell.faith. I also want you to go to the website, jasonpowell.faith, and give me your name and your email so I can stay in contact with you and begin to share these devotionals and videos and worship and prayers that God gives me every week. And I want you to know that it is a privilege to be able to communicate with you in this way. Feel free to leave comments. Feel free to leave thoughts. I would love to engage with you to see where you are in this. If you're inspired to give, then know that you can do that at jasonpowell.faith/donate. And the gifts that you give help us to spread more of this type of content throughout the earth. Remember, greater is the life source in you than anything going on around you. You can outlast whatever it is because you have the outlasting presence of spirit residing in you. Remind yourself of that. Whenever problems or trials come, remind yourself that the greater one is at work within me.